Hello and welcome. You're watching the special broadcast of the WION-VOA co-production with me, Priyanka Sharma. Let's start with the latest. President Joe Biden is pushing back against low approval ratings by touting a measure that he says will help the U.S. create jobs and fight inflation. The Chips and Science Act also aims to boost U.S. competitiveness against China by allocating billions of dollars towards domestic semiconductor manufacturing and research. VOA's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has this report. Take a look.
Semiconductors are needed to produce everything from cars to electronics. In the 1990s, the U.S. was the global leader, but is now behind China, which accounts for 24% of global production, followed by Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, according to the Semiconductor Industry Association. President Joe Biden wants to catch up.
This bill makes it clear the world's leading innovation will happen in America. We will both invent in America and make it in America.
On Tuesday, Biden marked the passage of the Chips and Science Act, virtually joining Gretchen Whitmer, governor of the state of Michigan, a major hub for the American auto industry, hit hard by the semiconductor shortage.
This bill will mean humming factories and lower costs on electronics, medical devices, farm equipment, and cars for working families.
The $280 billion legislation includes $52 billion to boost domestic semiconductor research and manufacturing.
And what can't be reasonably onshored, either because it's cost prohibitive or other allied countries simply do it better, we can allied shore manufacturing and support that.
The administration has leveraged partnership with South Korea and Japan, countries Biden visited in May. In Seoul, he toured Samsung's chips factory, the model for a $17 billion facility it is setting up in the United States. The U.S. is also launching a new joint research hub with Japan to manufacture chips as early as 2025.
Washington's strategy seems to be pretty clear. Gain autonomy and eliminate critical dependencies on these global supply chain values.
But the heart of the U.S.-China tech rivalry lies in Taiwan, a self-governing island Beijing claims to be its breakaway province. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, TMSC, produces 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. A conflict here will have disastrous effects on global manufacturing. TMSC shares fell nearly 3% on Tuesday as U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi landed in Taipei in a visit she said demonstrated American solidarity, defying China's stark warnings. Ahead of her visit, Beijing released a video of its military drills with the slogan, "Bury all the enemies that dare to invade." Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
This, of course, is the top story in the VOA broadcast. As of now, President Joe Biden is now pushing back against low approval ratings by touting a measure that he says will help the U.S. create more jobs and essentially fight inflation. At the center of it is the Chips and Science Act, which aims to boost U.S. competitiveness against China by allocating billions of dollars towards domestic semiconductor manufacturing and research. It's important to note that semiconductors are needed to produce everything from cars to electronics, which is what makes this act ever more significant. Now, to understand this better, Voice of America's Chris Casquejo joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Chris, thanks for joining us. My first question, China's response has included multiple live-fire drills encircling Taiwan, which began on Thursday. We're already seeing the impact on air and ship traffic. What will this mean for global consumers?
Good morning from Washington, D.C., Priyanka. Well, for one thing, global consumers should be prepared to wait longer for items manufactured in Asia. This year alone, Bloomberg data shows that 88% of the world's largest container ships and nearly half of the global container fleet pass through the Taiwan Strait. Trade routes to the Europe and Middle East run through the Taiwan Strait. Essentially, it's the main transit point for anything made in Asian factory hubs and exported to Europe, the U.S., and elsewhere. Of course, this comes on top of global supply chain snarls due to the pandemic and China's zero COVID policy, not to mention Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With these live fire drills, China is attempting to show that it can execute a complete blockade of Taiwan. Already 5 of the missiles have landed in waters that are within Japan's exclusive economic zone. But the problem is the economic impact won't be just felt in Taiwan, it will be felt across the world.
Right, Chris, what are the implications of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, of course, for the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, when Taiwan welcomes the third-ranking American official, it seems in China's mind to be fairly close to treating Taiwan as a country, as Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institute told VOA this week. Now remember, Beijing sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, not a country, and President Xi Jinping has vowed to reunify the self-ruled island with the mainland. But remember, we're drawing closer to this fall's Communist Party elections where Xi is expected to be elected for a third term as General Secretary, which all but guarantees his election as president next year. And we've seen Xi make decisions that show a lack of flexibility, from the zero COVID policy that I mentioned earlier, which shut down much of the country and slowed down economic growth. These decisions were unpopular with the Chinese people, and analysts say showing the nation's military strength could be politically helpful as these elections draw near.
Right, Chris, thanks so much for all those inputs. Let's move on now. The US-directed killing of the Al-Qaeda leader who was living in Afghanistan was a blow to the terror group's leadership. But will this affect its offshoots in the Middle East, Africa and Asia? The White House says it's not taking its eyes off any terror threats that arise, and terrorism researchers say that the US needs to be vigilant and patient. VOA's Anita Powell reports from the White House.
The White House says it has high confidence that its targeted strike killed al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri.
We have eliminated the emir of al-Qaeda.
But the White House also says cutting off the head of the beast may not neutralize the threat.
They're in North Africa, they're in the Sahel, they're throughout the Middle East, and they're in Yemen. I get that we're focused on Afghanistan right now, but we're not taking our eye off the rest of the world either.
Since Osama bin Laden formed the group in 1988, al-Qaeda has sprouted numerous offshoots, united over the decades by intolerance, hatred of the U.S. and Israel, and a strict interpretation of Islam.
Al-Qaeda may not be actively, operationally planning an attack on U.S. soil, but ideologically, it remains, ideologically opposed to the U.S. So, that very fact is something that we shouldn't overlook.
Especially in Africa, where affiliates have flourished.
My advice to Biden and to the American government is that, yes, okay, we can kill the leadership, but I think it's a very tiny aspect of the fight against terrorism. The focus should actually be on addressing, the factors, the political and economic factors that actually shield terrorism, or which actually give oxygen, to terrorism around the world.
But al-Zawahiri's death will affect these groups. Although he was not a charismatic leader like bin Laden, he was a disciplined one.
Zawahiri was effective in kind of keeping this broader network of affiliates, franchise groups, and branches together, from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa and further afield. That's probably what he should get the most credit for, is maintaining that alliance and doing it through the turbulent period of the Arab Spring and the rise of the Islamic State.
So what now? On that, the president was clear.
My administration will continue to vigilantly monitor and address threats from al-Qaeda, no matter where they emanate from.
Analysts also urged patience.
These groups are patient and they're highly capable. And so to dismiss them as kind of a nuisance or a has-been, and I know everybody wants to focus on great power competition with Russia and China and kind of leave behind the global war on terrorism, I would say, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center the first time in 1993, killing 6 people. At the time, they were a relatively obscure group, until September 11th, 2001. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
We still have Chris Casquejo live with us from Washington, D.C. on this broadcast. Chris, does the U.S. have an assessment on who will replace Ayman al-Zawahiri?
Priyanka, nothing is certain at this point. Analysts tell VOA that the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri will send al-Qaeda into a period of instability as it tries to figure out who will replace him. Security experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, D.C. said the group may not have a succession plan. But many agree that the current al-Qaeda number 2, Saif al-Adel, who is Egyptian and a veteran operative, is a top candidate for the position. CSIS also assesses that Zawahiri's son-in-law, Abdul Rahman al-Maghrebi, is also a contender. He's currently the head of al-Qaeda's propaganda arm, and both of the men are believed to be in Iran.
Right, Chris. What does the strike on al-Zawahiri mean for the Taliban's quest for international legitimacy?
Well, it does not look promising for them in that quest. Under the Doha Agreement, they had promised not to allow Afghanistan to become a terror sanctuary again. And not only was this where the U.S. located Ayman al-Zawahiri, the chief planner of those 9/11 attacks, but he was staying at the home of the Taliban's government interior minister. It's just 2 miles from where the U.S. embassy used to be located in Kabul. U.S. officials told VOA that the Taliban knew that al-Zawahiri was staying there with his family, even though as recently as July 6th, the Taliban supreme leader reaffirmed that the group guarantee that it would not allow Afghan territory to become a safe haven for terrorists once again.
Right, Chris, thanks so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on this special WION VOA broadcast.